Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leaders from U.S. Territories on Environmental Justice and Community Resilience. I'm Adrienne Isea. I'm the Deputy Director at Green 2.0. At Green 2.0, we recognize that people of color are the most impacted by environmental issues, but they're the least represented in positions of power. Our organization works to increase diversity in the environmental movement and ensure that organizations are actually inclusive and equitable. During today's event, which I'm personally really excited for, we will hear from leaders of color from U.S. territories on the work they're doing in their communities to ensure that programs and policies are implemented that actually target climate change and address racial, ethnic, economic, and environmental justice. For too long, colonialism has been responsible for creating conditions that purposely prevent the people of these communities from actually having a place in decision-making processes on policies and the things that actually directly impact their lives, even when climate change and natural disasters continue to do devastating damage to their communities. A few housekeeping notes before we start today. We are live captioning today's event. If you have questions throughout the event, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll try our best to get to all of your questions. And you will receive an email tomorrow with a recording of the event, and it will also be posted on our YouTube page tomorrow. We really appreciate and thank everyone for joining us today. And I'll now turn it over to Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, who joined us via video remarks pre-recorded. We appreciate her time. We're sorry she couldn't be with us and are very appreciative. Thank you, everyone.
Good day. I'm Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett. I'm sorry I'm not participating live, but I'm happy to join virtually for this conversation about environmental justice and community resilience. Thank you, Green 2.0, for extending an invitation to share a few words. It's great to see such a robust participation from leaders in the U.S. territories assembled to share their experiences on barriers to addressing environmental issues and what is needed to solve them. I would also like to give special greetings to my fellow Virgin Islander, Kemet Amon Lewis, whose activism and passion for our island community and others like it speaks for itself. As the Virgin Islands representative in Congress, I'm acutely aware of the unique challenges our islands face. Our island communities are particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change as we encounter more severe weather patterns and the long-term prospect of rising sea levels and ecosystem changes. Of the 3.5 million Americans who live in U.S. territories, more than 98% are racial or ethnic minorities. We face diversity due to the devastating effects of climate change and the unequal distribution of federal resources. But I am committed to safeguarding environmental policies and ensuring our communities are protected, regardless of race, zip code, or income. The Virgin Islands of the United States has two environmental factors which require intense focus for mitigation and transformation. Extreme weather patterns are occurring at an increasingly frequency and severity, which has dramatic consequences. In 2019, my office worked successfully with the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the inclusion of the Virgin Islands on the U.S. Drought Monitor, which provides vital information about drought conditions, as evidenced by the classification this summer of a D4 drought on St. Croix and a D2 drought in the St. Thomas-St. John district. The impacts of this drought were felt by our agricultural industry, as well as the entire community, which relies upon rainwater collected in cisterns to meet daily water needs. As you all know, with each passing year, the hurricane season begins earlier, ends later, and brings more severe storms. In the industry area, the Virgin Islands has a Superfund site, as well as questions about the continuation of an oil refinery and storage site. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to climate resilience and supporting underserved and minority communities, and it is my hope that opportunities available through the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law benefit are utilized to address both industry and environmental factors. The Department of Justice recently announced the launch of the Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands Environmental Crimes Task Force. This task force will work specifically to investigate and prosecute violations of federal law harming the environment, wildlife, and human health, and associated fraud, waste, and abuse in the region. While I believe the genesis of a task force may be well-intentioned, a crime task force that emphasizes the criminal enforcement without a larger focus on support and technical assistance to the Virgin Islands government and to businesses here in the territory would not be a good use of resources. A task force whose main focus is to promote and enhance interagency cooperation to ensure our communities receive adequate support and protection is something I could support. We must prioritize the health of our communities and ensure that environmental crimes are prevented and, if necessary, mitigated. My Democratic colleagues and I have delivered intentional climate strategies and policies. In the 117th Congress, the past Congress, this included transformational investments to establish a foundation for the future of climate-friendly practices. The bipartisan infrastructure law provides $55 billion to expand clean water drinking access, $21 billion for Superfund site cleanup, and $50 billion to protect against severe weather events and increase resiliency. The Inflation Reduction Act provides $21 billion for legacy pollution reduction, $37 billion to provide disadvantaged communities affordable and accessible clean energy, and more than $2 billion to bring good-paying jobs to disadvantaged communities. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from environmental leaders who have been on the front line advocating for the territories. Their experiences and insights are invaluable, and it is important that we uplift and support their efforts. Lastly, I want to encourage everyone to think critically about the steps you can take, large or small, in advancing environmental justice efforts. Thank you.
Hi all. I'm happy to be here and come together with everyone to talk about these critical issues that we honestly need to be talking more about. Thank you to Adrian for inviting me and the team of Green 2.0 for providing the space for the visibility of U.S. territories to discuss realities that we're facing. My name is Jennifer Tirado Villanueva. I am the founder and executive director of El Cuerpo Climático de Puerto Rico, or the Puerto Rico Climate Corps. We kicked off our pilot in November of 2022 to engage young adults disconnected from the economy to join national service for the purposes of offering mobilization efforts to existing local sustainability initiatives on the island to mitigate the effects of climate change. Again, happy to be here. We have so much to cover. I am eager to get started and hear from our panel today. I would like to have the panel introduce themselves and turn on cameras, share your names, pronouns, locations, and the organization you represent. I would like to first begin with Kemet Amon Lewis.
Good afternoon, all, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Kemet Amon Lewis. I am currently located in South Florida, but I am from St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and happy to be here. Oh, I currently work for the Perry Institute for Marine Science.
Awesome. Thank you, Kemet. Wilmar, I would like for you to kick it off.
Let's see. Hi, can you all hear me? Yeah. Hi, my name is Wilmar Vasquez. I'm from Puerto Rico. I am the director of Movimiento en Defensa de Nuestras Playas, which is a nonprofit that has been, it started in 2022 as well. And it's been advocating for visibility for our public beaches rights and the right of the people of Puerto Rico to be able to enjoy these spaces that are so important for our communities. Such a pleasure to join you guys in this discussion.
Thank you, Wilmar. I would like to have Monica kick it off for us too.
Mafere Chiro, everybody. Guajusi Muñeca Dioro. I am from the Marianas Islands. I go by she, they pronouns. I'm on my homelands in the island of Saipan right now. This is the homelands of the Chamorro people, and I am the executive director of the Micronesia Climate Change Alliance.
Thank you, Monica.
Muñeca.
Muñeca. Plainly put, environmental justice work in U.S. territories cannot be done without placing the residents of these communities at the forefront and respecting their leadership. From your perspective, how does the environmental justice movement need to shift to ensure these leaders' voices and knowledge are being heard and respected? And this question goes to all of you who would like to start.
I can begin. I think one of the things that's critically needed now is as we continue to transition away from the old and look forward to the new, we need to start putting a better value on the field in general. I think for a number of years, we just didn't have enough incentives to create that, at least in the USVI and on St. Croix where I'm from, the visibility of individuals working in the field of environmental justice or in the marine sciences or in agriculture and whatnot. And so, often in our case, we have people that are making decisions that aren't from the territory and don't have the cultural experience, don't have the same lived experience as many of the islanders do. And so a lot of the decisions that were made have been, not based on anything cultural in the Virgin Islands. And I think the more we can incentivize our youth to go into the field, to teach them more about the issues, the more that we can get these real decisions made, these real answers for the issues that are based in our cultural practices, our norms. And yeah, I think that's one of the ways that we need to move forward.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Is there anyone who would like to have an offering here?
Yeah, over here. So I was mainly thinking, like, I'm also specialized in environmental policies, and I feel like the way these policies were thought out, they were, thought of the US, it wasn't thought of for people like us that live in the territories, that are islanders, that have specific needs and specific value of our land and the way we use our land. So I feel like the way these policies were thought of, where our resources were thought of in value of money, how can we get, more value for water, for like tourism, and all this to exploit, these resources. And the way maybe us as islanders view our resources is more of like an entity, there were people before us and there's gonna be people after us. So we need to take care of this environment as a whole, not just for us that are living here right now, but for future generations. So I feel it's our responsibilities to like educate ourselves the most that we can, and then pass that knowledge to the communities that have not had access to sit at the table with policymakers and tailor these needs to what we need here in our island. So I feel like nobody's going to give you power, so you have to go and take it, but you have to be ready to have hard discussions and make your point across. So that's why education is so important.
I totally agree, Wilmar, and I just also wanted to uplift the greatness of how the environmental justice is becoming more and more intersectional, and how we still need to be pushing that intersectionality lens, because what has impacted the environment is also a direct cause of racial injustice and just different forms of oppression that have also viewed humans as less than or other than. And so there, especially for us in the territories where we're not even included a lot in foundation funding, or we're very much an afterthought. And I think the lens of the just transition has been really helpful for me, coming all the way out from the territories and wanting to see transformation and really prioritizing the most vulnerable amongst us. Those who are most impacted should be that centered at the decision making and the solution making, and having more people from the territories whose value systems are very much in line with ensuring regeneration and ensuring that the next generations, as Wilma was saying, are taken care of is such a beautiful thing that all people can learn from, and that our system should shift to.
Thank you all. That's exactly, I think you guys did such a beautiful, you covered all the aspects, I mean, that that I've been thinking about. So thank you all for your wholeness here. I want to now have Keme and Monica. Did I say it right, Monica? Have you guys answer this question. So due to lack of funding and support from the government, communities in U.S. territories have long been forced to be self-resilient in their work to target the issues that affect their communities. What are some of those gaps you're seeing affecting your communities, and what are the ways in which they work together to fill in those gaps?
I can start off. I think because of, at least in the Mariana Islands, we're 8,000 miles away from the US continent, and most people don't even know about Guam and the CNMI, and the role that we're playing as military outpost for the empire. And so we do get a lot of funding in our territories, probably more, especially in Guam, than most other territories, but it's not coming outside of the fence. There's just been billions of dollars spent within our islands to build military bases. A third of the island of Guam is a military base, and almost 3/4 of an island of Tinian is going to be turned into a military jungle gym, basically. And these infrastructures come with a lot of toxins, come with a lot of contamination. And so even though there's a lot of funding for these things, there's not enough funding for the cleanup, for the contamination that we experience, as well as like the sort of social ails like anxiety, depression, and substance abuse that comes along also with hosting military businesses, and just colonization in general. And then, our cultures, we've been so tied to our lands and to our waters, and to have our lands and waters, the access to those important vital resources cut off, has definitely degraded our cultures and degraded our ability to be self-reliant. I know in the case of, in the Marianas, we import 80 to 90% of our food. And that's given climate change and more of the disasters coming, that's a huge concern for us as residents. So some of the things that have been happening in our lands is a big food sovereignty movement that's right alongside the EJ movement, and more just consciousness about reclaiming our ancestral ways. And of course, those things don't come with funding. Those things, people have to sacrifice a lot to devote themselves to doing anything that's outside of the rat race. Even though it is enriching, it is really difficult to really devote yourself to doing things like language restoration and food sovereignty work. So there is definitely a gap there. And one of the other things too, where I think our value systems show up really hard, and it's pretty, and we see it right now in the Hawaiian Islands and Maui, is just the disaster relief and recovery, and the efforts of grassroots on the ground organizations, and how they're they organize really quickly, deploy resources really quickly, and that's a very different from the national entities, or even national NGOs like the Red Cross and other efforts too for disaster capitalism that come in after some of these things are experienced a lot between, I think, all of us in the territories. And those are things that we're still trying to navigate as people on the front lines.
That was beautifully said, Muñeca, and I don't have a ton to add there, but I think it goes the same. There's a funding issue everywhere. What's one of the things that I'm mindful of is that for many instances, the industries, and whether it's the military testing or whatever that cause environmental damage, the same level of resources don't go towards the restoration or recovery of these spaces. And so I think that's always a huge gap in the most literal sense, but there's a lot more that needs to be done to, really consider what damage is being caused from these, whichever. We have a very specific case about colonialism in a different sense in terms of how the Hess oil refinery was built on St. Croix and how it ended up on St. Croix in the first place. It wasn't by chance. And so, the Congresswoman mentioned, we have a Superfund site on St. Croix now, and that is a reality. Now, it'll be interesting to see how resources go towards the cleanup of that site and a remedy to a huge issue that's been in the territory for a number of decades now.
I also wanted to speak to federal funding and just the sort of, I come from a small nonprofit, and it's intimidating to want to even apply for a federal grant, and you have to have special like IRS status, and just the administrative work that would take away from our staff to doing on the ground resilience building work. It's something that's just not really worth it. It's such a technical process to report federal grants and to apply for federal grants. And while there is millions and millions of dollars with the infrastructure or what is it, the Inflation Reduction Act, it's definitely hard for our communities and frontline organizers to respond and try to get those funds, because we just don't have the technical abilities and or the skills to really acquire or maintain those funds.
That's such a huge point. Thank you both. As we know, U.S. territories are facing life-threatening climate disasters that leave communities without food, water, and housing for years after the disaster happens. While the government fails to properly address these issues, what changes do you think need to happen federally and locally to create effective responses in the face of these disasters? Muñeca and Wilmar, would love for you guys to offer.
Let me see, my internet like lagged a little there, but I think we're on the next question, right? Like, I didn't hear it. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it's we're facing life-threatening climate crisis. What changes do you think need to happen federally and locally to create actual responses in the face of disasters that aren't going to take years?
Yeah, as you all know, Hurricane Maria was horrible here in Puerto Rico, and we're still recovering. That was 2017. So I feel like this hurricane actually pulled the rug under our feet, because I feel like people were very boxed in the whole, we're part of the US and we're like US citizens and like living on this fantasy land. And when we had to face all the problems that came after Hurricane Maria, that's when we really like started internalizing what colonialism really is. Because yes, we've seen Puerto Ricans flee, to the mainland, the US or other parts of the world, looking for better opportunities, because sadly our island is, coming scarcer and scarcer for, job opportunities and development for all our citizens here. Let's not even talk about education and health and all this, but mainly with our power supply, what is Energía Eléctrica, which is now Luma, which is the company that runs, the power. It's been a whole disaster right after Maria. And FEMA was the agency that actually stepped in to help. Till this day, there's still people with like los toldos azules. I'm trying to look for the words, if you can help me translate, that they're trying to cover, from the rain. So
the blue tarps and
the blue tarps. And because of this, there have been many nonprofits that have started just to put a roof over people's heads, just for their groceries not to get wet, or, just to live by. And so one of the main issues with FEMA was that they needed the titles of the properties in order to give, this help. And many people, they just, the houses were passed on generation after generation. So they didn't have the title. So you see the same problem that nonprofits are facing in regards of like the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the IRS terms. And it's like, we see the same with FEMA, and the people that really need the help do not have the resources and how to access, this fund. So I feel like there has to be a whole rethinking of the way, the federal government or the government, local government even, hands out these helps, because they're alienating completely the people that actually need it. And so everybody's left to fend for themselves. So definitely the bureaucracy of the whole system makes it even worse, and people keep dying and people keep needing food. We've lost lots of resources, like millions and millions of money worth in water, bottled water, donations that they were given to the government, and the local government didn't have the capacity and the logistics to actually hand it out. So we saw how individuals and nonprofits and community leaders had to step in order for the help to get there. So in regards with climate change, when islands are the first ones to see the impact of the climate change of this whole new world that we're facing, and we see that the way the government or the way this aids are set up, they're not getting there, we are headed for a really bad awakening, in the next coming years if we don't do something now to fix it. So it's urgent to have these discussions and to make policies more accessible for people.
I 100% agree, Wilmer. I think definitely it's the mutual aid networks that need more empowering. It's those mutual aid networks who meet the needs of the people, because they are the people themselves, helping out one another. And these things have been generationally instilled in us as islanders. I think islanders have an innate ability to share resources, have an innate want to ensure that everybody is taken care of. And we see this in our disasters. We just had a typhoon in May, and it was really great to be a part of the efforts to really ensure that those most vulnerable amongst us, who the government wasn't even going to check on, we had to actually attend the FEMA, the volunteer organization meetings, to tell them which roads to go down, which places to go see, where complete neighborhoods were decimated from the typhoon. And hundreds of families were left without shelters, and these weren't on the radar of the federal entities because they're not from here. They're flown in, and they parachute in all of their resources, and then they leave. And so definitely empowering and funding more mutual aid efforts is going to be really important. And there also needs to just be more prevention and more accountability to polluters and to those who are causing the climate crisis, and not just waiting for these disasters to happen. I know that there's a lot of funding right now for hardening shorelines, and there's a lot of funding for renewable energy. And I really hope that this is done in a just way. These systems and programs should be done and made where the community is the ones that are stewarding them, instead of just, not knowing how to fix them when they break. One of the programs that I got to visit Puerto Rico just in June, and I was really just in awe of two organizations, Organization Borican, and they really help out farmers, and Omnisar 2020, and they're really helping to bring solar panels to families in ways that are really affordable and ways that can be taken down but if a storm is going to come. And that's not something that I've seen in our islands just yet. And to see the way that they've deployed after Typhoon or Hurricane Maria, and then the difference that knowledge made for when they were able to respond to Hurricane Fiona a few years later was night and day. And so we are learning quickly, and we're using resources to its maximum potential. And I think it's those efforts that need the most priorities, and not necessarily the government entities that take so long, that don't have the capacity to bring things out. And people know what to do. They just need to get the resources out to make it happen.
Thank you both. This question goes to all of the panelists. How has prioritizing U.S. territories as vacation destinations for tourists affected local residents' ability to access and enjoy areas that they once had access to.
Yeah, so I can start there. So in the USVI, there's some of that, but there's also a very strong, well, the policy is in place that, you know, no beach is private in the US Virgin Islands. It's all open to the public. And so any developer that has property on the beach, that creates property on the beach, has to provide shoreline access. And in some instances, that access isn't direct and it's not as straightforward as it probably should be. But at the end of the day, there is this spirit of the people from the Virgin Islands, especially people from St. Croix, St. John for that matter, also that says that the beaches are public and we, the people of the islands, will enjoy the beach regardless of where it's at. And so that's one of the things that I can say. I'm happy for. On St. Croix, again, the scenario is a little bit different because tourism on St. Croix looks different than tourism on St. Thomas and St. John, for example. On St. Thomas, where you can get anywhere up to 7 cruise ships in a day, compared to maybe 1 every 5 weeks on St. Croix, if that much. The issue on St. Croix isn't as evident as some of the issues might be on St. Thomas, but again, at the end of the day, there are these things in place that allow for the assurance from all the residents and the people that are from the islands that there is no one that can remove your space from a local beach, which is great.
I love hearing that, Kevin. My grandfather was actually a senator on the island of Guam, and he instituted the same sort of law. And it just came up last year when a hotel was denying some of my friends access to go to the beach. And there was a big uproar on social media about that, and just needing to remind people that those beaches are public beaches and you can't cut off access to locals. For us too, in the Mariana Islands, especially the island of Guam, the military, you have to have a special ID card to access the military lands, and those were pristine farmlands and some of the most beautiful areas on our islands. And so there's still efforts to try to get like cultural practitioners to get on those on the bases to collect things like traditional medicine or wood that might be used for carving a canoe. And those efforts aren't met easily. It always changes depending on who the leadership is and the commander is of the bases. And then also with tourism, whenever a disaster strikes, there's always a prioritization of ensuring the safety of the tourists, and that's definite. And then so the power goes right back on in the tourist industry, in the villages where the tourists are, before the power goes on to the rest of the island. And then just I guess getting the tourist out of the island. The airport is more open to tourists after times of disasters. And then I think there's just not enough effort, even within the local community, to really educate tourists on the impacts of tourism in our communities and to really give them an authentic experience what the island's like for islanders. It's a different reality when you come in as a tourist than when you are as a homegrown someone from there. And so I wish that there was more opportunities or even just creativities to ensure that when people come, they really feel the essence and the spirit of and the way that we feel about our islands, which is, just that these places are blessings and that our ancestors and just the specialness that we have with our ancestors to be a part of these islands. That's definitely not what's sold by our visitors bureaus. And yeah, it's more of like where America's Day begin, and it's a shop, but you can shop duty free. It's very capitalistic, and I think there could be more done to have more of a connection that's genuine for those experiences. And that's the kind of tourist I like to be, or traveler I like to be, is really find locals and really feel and experience what that place means for the people who live there.
I got so excited with this question because it's actually what I've been pouring my heart and soul to this past year. We started En Defensa de Nuestras Playas because here in Puerto Rico, there's a slang It says, ¿de quiénes son las playas? Or who do the beaches belong to? And everybody says, las playas son del pueblo. Beaches belong to the people. And it's such a beautiful phrase that has been used by so many people in the fights to reclaim our beaches. You know, this is our identity as islanders to the world. So it's, other than our rights, you know, to enjoy these beaches, it's our responsibility to take care of them, because nobody else is going to take care of them the way we value them, the way we love them, and the way we want to maintain them. And so my journey in this nonprofit actually started because in January of last year, there was a couple that lived in a neighborhood near the coast in San Juan. And one of the lady, the wife, they had bought a huge mansion in Ocean Park, and they felt entitled that the beach, the access to the beach belonged to them. So there was a group of people that were going to play beach tennis, and this lady got all mad. She said, "You're blocking our view and our pathway, you know, to the beach, and this belongs to us because we bought it, because we bought $1 million home. So when you have $1 million, then you can put the beach court wherever." And this outraged me so much, because growing up here, my parents have always taken me to the beach, you know, and I was like thinking, what are my kids, you know, going to have access to if we don't stand up and say this is wrong? So I got together with a few people and we organized a beach tennis tournament that same Saturday. Like, this happened on Monday. And we were like, we're going to do a beach tennis tournament, and we're going to teach these people that we can all share, you know, the beach. It does not belong to a single person. It belongs to everybody. It does not belong to the government. It belongs to the people. But because it belongs to the people, it's the people's responsibility to take care of it and to educate ourselves into what types of species also, enjoy the beach. We have here in Puerto Rico, we have 3 different sea turtles. We have leatherbacks, we have hawksbill, we have the green turtle that nests in these same beaches that we're talking about. And at the same time, we have a tax haven that's enabling, you know, people to come here and enjoy the island in a very capitalist ways. And you're excluding the locals and excluding also the other residents, which are animals, plants that have been enjoying these spaces for years and years. And if we get rid of them and if we damage this environment, we're not going to have the beauty, which is what you capitalize out of, you know, what you sell to the tourists. So I feel there's a way we can make a balance with economic development and tourism, but we have to have respect for what is ours. And we have to educate ourselves into what is at risk. What are we going to lose? I don't want to get, you know, too extensive, because this is something that I'm so passionate about. But definitely there's a night and day from what the tourists see and what the average Puerto Rican sees. And you know, when what we treasure about our beaches, we grow up in our beaches. We mingle, we de-stress in our beaches. I surf, you know, here, and it's such a blessing, as Muñeca said, to have the opportunity to drive 15-20 minutes and be in a paradise, and you see the sunrise and you see turtles come to nest, and you can swim with sharks, and you see such amazing sunsets and sunrises. And it's like, why do I want to give that up, you know, for a tourist to pay $15,000 in a hotel that maybe I'm going to work as a to maintain it, but I'm never going to be able to bathe myself in that beach. You know, that's not what I want for future generations. So I'm so grateful for you guys having, you know, this space and this conversation, because I feel we need to get this message clear in everybody's head. You know, the beaches belong to the people, and it's our responsibility to take care of them.
Wow, that's so incredible. It's such a call to action for all of us. I don't even know how to continue. Thank you so much, all of you, for your passion, your offerings today. Muñeca, in Guam and Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, continued militarization is something that is greatly impacted and the Chamorro people and their lands? What specific impacts on the island and residents of Guam and the Northern Marianas have you seen from this ongoing military presence?
Yeah, so this is we're gonna go there. We have to dive deep because we have a long history of militarization. In fact, our islands were the island of Guam and the Marianas really came into the American family via the spoils of being a spoil of war after the Spanish-American War, just like Puerto Rico and the Philippines at the same time. And so Guam has been a U.S. territory since 1898. And the CNMI came after World War II, and it's that 1898 is an important date for our islands because it split the unity that we had as one archipelago from Guam and the rest of the Northern Mariana Islands. There's 15 of us all together. It split us politically, and we've been politically divided since. And in 1898, the islands were sold, the Northern Marianas were sold to Germany, and then after World War II, they went to Japan. So that splintering is still something that's being affected. That affects our people right now. We can't ship goods. In the island of Guam, we have to adhere to the Jones Act, and the CNMI they don't. There's just a lot of different things because of our statuses. The CNMI also was able to negotiate a consultation process for any plans that the federal government has for the lands or waters. They also were able to negotiate something called Article 12, which is really treasured here, which is the land alienation rights. And so you have to be a descendant of the Northern Marianas group to own land here, which is something that's so prized, especially coming from Guam, where majority of the land is owned by, if not the military, then foreign enterprises and other non-local entities. So to come to the CNMI, where all the lands are basically owned by families and people still live in family compounds and have ranches, it's just a beautiful thing to witness how the culture is still really strong and how the language is still really strong. And I really believe it's because of the way that they were able to protect the rights to their lands. And that's been huge when it comes to militarization. Just the other day, the military had a sharing session here on the islands of Saipan and the rest of the Marianas to discuss what their plans are and how they've shifted from 2015. It's called the CJMT, and it's the Marine Corps plans for building training sites on the island of Tinian. And because they've talked a lot and had to consult a lot and come to an agreement together with the local government, it's been a lot more I guess an easier pill for the people to swallow of their presence. And that's just drastically opposed to what I've experienced in the demilitarization efforts on Guam, where the military just comes in and they straight say sovereign U.S. soil and we can do whatever we want here. The governor of Guam also tried to stop the construction of the military's marine base a few years ago, and her calls for stopping it because of the impacts on ancestral burials on Camp Blas were met with a letter from the commander of the Navy. We're like, oh, we hear your concerns, but no. And so even our highest form of elected leadership has no say against the military commanders here. And that's a stark difference. And having that sort of, knowing that sort of like power dynamic does something incredibly deep in our psyches as people from Guam. And the fact that the people of Guam haven't expressed their inherent inalienable human right to self-determination is something that is really important. And I think we need a lot more assistance in getting the word out that we really do need more sovereignty and more say in our islands, because really Congress and the U.S. Presidency has more say than any of the people who live on our islands or who are even elected in our islands for what we do with our lands and waters. And what that has meant is that we have so many invasive species. We've lost 9 species of birds. We have 100 Superfund sites on the small island of Guam. Just the military contamination has been incredibly rampant, and there's so many cancers, non-communicable diseases is really high, and the it impacts everybody. And then of course most people join the military because there is really no other opportunities being from the territories. So we have a high rate of enlistment, so many people in who are veterans, and then that comes with its own set of trauma, especially if they served in a war, and that impacts families for generations. And there's a lot of pride in that, and because we have such a saturation of militarism within our dynamics, it's really hard to be critical of any of the actions the military is taking in our lands, even though we know it's detrimental, and even though we know that they have a history of contamination, not just in our lands, but in Okinawa and in Hawaii, and basically everywhere they go, they leave contamination, and then they don't have any accountability for cleanup. And so the issue of climate change too is just a huge thing for us in the islands. We're really experiencing so much more hurricanes, or we call them typhoons where we are, and the frequency intensity is something we are experiencing pretty. Yeah, it's real for us. Just a few weeks ago, NOAA released a statement that we're in El Nino, and that means that there might be 3 more storms just this year and the rest of this year, and definitely within the next few years, while it's still El Nino, we all need to be on alert. And so the compounding impacts of climate change and militarization makes it really difficult to want to stay here. And of course, with inflation and just being more expensive to live in our islands, it's like $10 for a gallon of milk. It's almost $6 for a gallon of gas here. It's not easy to remain here. And that's a big thing. To have our people leave is another major impact. I know all of us in the territories feel. And I think just the biggest thing too is the threat of war. And that's a real concern for our people, just given where we are and the geopolitical tensions that are growing, and our history of being caught in the crosshairs of 2 warring superpowers is something that our grandparents lived through. Thousands of people died here during World War II. And tens of thousands of soldiers died here too, both on the Japanese side and the US side. And so death and destruction is something that we've experienced in recent history. And we've with the island of Guam, for instance, has been the target of North Korea, and there's apparently a missile named the Guam Killer by China. And now there's all these efforts to build nuclear powered missile defense systems on the island, which is another really scary thing. And that sort of anxiety is something that we're living with, and those conversations of like, how are we going to survive not just climate change, but the impacts of and the threat of war is so real for us. And I think the biggest thing that the entire environmental justice movement needs to really do is to call in and hold the military accountable for their role in climate change. The U.S. military is the largest consumer and polluter in the planet, consumer of fossil fuels, and they protect the entire system. And it's entrenched in academic systems, it's entrenched in banking systems. Like, truly, trillions and trillions of dollars go into the Department of Defense every year. Just this past year, the U.S. Congress allowed for almost $900 billion, and that's an annual budget. And if you include the prison industrial complex and the Veterans Affairs Office, that's well over $1 trillion in 1 year. And that is more than like 60 to 70% of the US annual budget goes to those entities. That doesn't help to for the public health or education of our people. It begs the question, what do Americans really prioritize? Who are they prioritizing? And I think that there needs to be so much more to uplift the military industrial complex in both climate change and all the other oppressions that we're feeling, not just in the territories, but across the United States.
Muñeca, thank you so much for that. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and you were able to do it. So beautifully, and just thank you for that offering. We are short on time. We do have one last question and then we'll hopefully be able to answer some questions from the folks who are here. So ideally, how do you see federal agencies, foundations, and nonprofit organizations working in collaboration with U.S. territories to build stronger networks and more effectively address environmental issues? How do you see the federal agencies and organizations working together?
So I can chime in here. One of the things that I was fortunate to have done in my career was join Congresswoman Plaskett and a number of other colleagues from the U.S. Virgin Islands and on Capitol Hill right after Hurricane Irma hit St. Thomas and before Hurricane Maria hit Irma hit St. Thomas and St. John, and Hurricane Maria hit St. Croix. In fact, the only reason I returned to St. Croix was because Hurricane Maria was, fun fact, supposed to be a tropical storm when I decided to go home, and then 24 hours later, she was a Category 5 hurricane. But what being in DC with the Congresswoman and the team allowed me to do is witness how our representatives and the senators across the US view the territories. Their biggest thing in almost all of the conversations that we had was that the territory, at least for us, isn't paying into the federal tax system. And so why should we continue to provide more federal aid to the territories? And that threw me back for a number of different reasons. But in my response to that, one, I don't think any of these islands wanted to become a territory and wished to be part of a colonial empire. I'm gonna start using that word, Monica, from now on. And two, the vast majority, as I mentioned before, of the environmental damage, as Monica just mentioned, with the over 100 Superfund sites in Guam, the ones that we have in the U.S. Virgin Islands, the issues that we have in Puerto Rico because of decades of military testing. Again, there has to be at some point some remedy for all of this. There has to be the resources put towards restoration. For the longest time, I mentioned that, St. Croix, as the way it is, should look like a Dubai or Abu Dhabi because we had Hess Refinery, which was at one point the largest refinery in the Western Hemisphere that supplied most of the fuel into the US and was created so that the businessmen in the US could avoid the EPA regulations by doing it in the US territory, by completely wiping out an agricultural industry that's helped to sustain the island. At one point in time, St. Croix was considered the breadbasket of the Caribbean. And you've completely decided on your own without input from the community that you were going to create this industry and move us away from the quote unquote nasty swamp that was the mangrove estuary that we now know is so important for the islands, especially in the change of the climate and the increase in the severity and the intensity of hurricanes. But yet we don't get the resources. We have, a $50,000 grant that will come in to be able to do a pilot habitat restoration project in 1 acre of the island. And there's not that transformational funding that is really coming into support. And so my thought there is that since it was okay to test these industries and military exercises and whatnot, then why not test the renewable energy, the sustainability practices, and test that at a scale that's, you can call it pilot if you want, but at a scale that really makes sense, an island-wide scale where the resources are really put in place to create that transformational change that's needed, and address that to environmental change, yes, because the environment needed, but because of the health implications that has been a part of all of this work also with the number of people that, as in Guam and in the USVI, it's the same, the number of incidences of cancer that has been a thing because of the refinery and because of all these other practices. There's effort that can be done to improve our power grid, our education system, healthcare, etc. I'm sitting here in Florida right now because in 2017, when Maria destroyed the hospital in St. Croix, it wasn't fixed. It was never fixed. There were porta potties at the ER so that you could go outside and use those. And when in 2019, I developed septic shock from a bacterial infection, probably from the ocean, and neither the hospital in St. Croix, they couldn't do anything for me. Fast forward to me being airlifted here in Florida, and a simple machine like a dialysis machine, which have kept me alive on St. Croix, that I had access to in Florida, and every single hospital room I was in wasn't available on St. Croix. And I am one of the instances where someone went through that and survived, and is able to join you guys on this webinar today to talk about what some of the issues are. But there are so many cases of others that have either been airlifted out of the island too late, or not airlifted and aren't here to tell their story. And so again, I think that if these countries are to be true about what's important, especially if you're going to quote unquote own the land and the people in a territory, because that's what the 1917 records call for when they bought the Virgin Islands from Denmark. It was the land and the people. Then you should be just in your efforts to create a positive change that again would allow us to live happy as human beings, because that at the end of the day, I think that's the most important part. Sorry for talking so long.
Thank you, Kemet, for sharing that personal story. And I can imagine that we all resonate in everything that you said. And thank you for all your offerings. We are absolutely, we ran out of time, but we were able to cover so much. And my hope is that folks who are here, the participants, I believe is 119 people. If I invite you to look for these leaders, support their mission, and continue the conversations. It doesn't stop here. Thank you so much for everyone joining today. Thank you for our panelists, the leaders, and on the mission, and all the sacrifice, and all of the everything that you pour into the islands, your islands. With that, I wish everyone a great and safe rest of the day. And I want to have a special shout out to Muñeca, who actually is starting her day really early, 6 o'clock in the morning, to be here with us. So thank you all. And with that, have a good rest of the day. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Green 2.0.
Thank you, Green 2.0.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys. Nice to be on a panel with you.